We are the nerds of the apocalypse.
So this panel is mainly about really a Q&A with Jeremy Whitley. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. And of course, Columbia's own Chad Bowers. That's how fan clubs are made right there. So, Jeremy, how long have you been writing?
Forever. No, I've been. I've always been a writer. Ever since I was in elementary school, it was always like that thing that I liked doing in school. I went to the University of North Carolina for English and creative writing, and I think that was the point where it became like a thing I really did. That was my thing. And then.
So you used the college education, and you're actually using it.
Well, first I used it to then work at Blockbuster Video for a few years, and then at Time Warner Cable for a little bit. But while I was doing those things, I started writing comics, and in theory, actually used my education, even though like creative writing programs for the large part, especially at UNC, are very against what they consider to be like speculative fiction. Anything that's fun is usually what I say, like sci-fi or fantasy or superheroes. Anything that doesn't involve like rich white guys feeling bad about their feelings. They were against anything that wasn't that.
It's kind of like comics too.
Yeah. But in comics, they then go punch their feelings out.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's the big difference. But no, I think. For a while, I was trying to figure out what it was I was going to do with writing, and then I got back into comics around that same time because while my parents live in Western North Carolina, there's not a lot of comic shops. There's nowhere for me to have gotten, to have stayed in comics when it wasn't at its peak. And then so I got back in, and at some point I figured out that people actually wrote comics that didn't have to be able to draw. I'm a terrible artist. Chad says he's a bad artist, but like I'm legitimately terrible. Like Chad's like, yeah, let me draw you a bad G.I. Joe, and I'm like, let me draw you a bad stick figure. The arms are not the same length. My stick figures walk like this, so like they don't have equal legs. It's just, I'm very bad at that part. But then I figured out like, oh, I didn't have to do that part. I can work with an artist who is legitimately good, and I can come up with ideas and make them real. Which is the coolest part of writing comics is I write down a crazy thing that happens on the page, and then somebody else has the job of like drawing it, and I get like realized pictures of that in my email, which is super cool.
Fan club just lost 3 members.
We're judging.
All right, they thought I could draw.
Wait, these guys are artists.
That's fair.
Yeah. Go back to Blockbuster for a couple years. It's
a Wells Fargo and a Quiznos now. So.
Ours is a Mattress City.
Chad, how long have you been dabbling in the rights?
The satanic rights? No, probably very similar to what Jeremy was saying. I got into comics when I was a kid, probably around, 12, 11 years old, something like that. And had been reading kind of like exclusively like, Archie books and
Comics Movie Pizza.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And then started writing short stories. And really, like Jeremy said, I kind of come at writing from like an artist perspective, even though I never was like I was like a guy who was an artist before and then became a writer like so many guys. But I probably enjoyed comics from an art standpoint first, and then sort of like realized that it was a lot easier to write, even though it's not. But at the time, I thought I could do more as a writer than learning how to be an artist. And then I went to school and I made a bunch of comics when I was in like high school and with friends, and we had our, it was the 90s, so we had a studio in my high school. And a bunch of me and my friends made comics. And came to college and met up with a bunch of other guys who made comics through my job at the comic store, where Heroes and Dragons here in town for a long time. And went to school for history and for education. So we got really good at research, but not necessarily good at writing anything creative, because obviously you're writing a lot of papers as a history major, but you're not writing anything it's like outside of writing something's already happened. That's already happened, right? You're not creating anything. And I felt kind of stifled by that. And kept writing comics, and after a few years, sort of like, maxed out a few credit cards, made my own mini comics, and started giving those to guys at cons. And then, as my life got more, I guess, a little busier, I started writing with another guy that worked at the comic store, a guy named Chris Sims, who many of you know. And Chris and I wrote comics locally for a while, mini comics, then we did some web comics, and then after that we kind of got, we wrote a relatively popular web comic called Awesome Hospital, which got noticed by quite a few editors, and they invited us to pitch on some books, and from there we started doing stuff professionally. Our first book was a book called Downset Fight, which was published by Oni, and then from there, that's it. Downset Fight.
Yeah, that is a highly recommended book coming from this guy.
Thanks. And we were probably the only guys who went from stupid medical comedy webcomic to stupid sports-themed fight comic to the X-Men. So, yeah, I wrote X-Men '92 with Chris for about, I guess, 14 issues total. We did it about a year and some change.
Do you start with an outline?
Yes, ma'am, most of the time, I do. Chris, who I co-write with, or have co-written with, he does not. He writes straight through. And I think it comes from a place of him being sort of like an essayist and a journalist and sort of a critic first. He writes comics a lot like he writes criticism. He doesn't necessarily do an outline. He just kind of writes straight through to begin. And his comic scripts sort of work like that, whereas mine sort of work like, okay, what imagery do I want to have in this? What character pieces do I want to have in this? And I sort of like try to... Yeah, sure, I like that. That's nice. Can I get a quote on that?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure the camera picked up.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I tend to kind of be somewhere in between. I think early on in my writing especially, like I was working with less of an outline and more sort of like an idea in my head of where I was going. Sometimes I'll have a notebook where I have just a series of words and phrases written down that wouldn't make any sense to anybody else, but to me is sort of an outline. It's, and I just tend to run with it, and I hate putting a lot of time into outlines because a lot of the time at some point I just throw them away because I'll hit on something that I think is better. And the point I think where you get too married to an outline, especially in your own stuff, is the point where your stuff starts to get worse. Because you go, oh, well, I have to hit these points, I have to get to this thing, this thing, this thing, but you have to be able to see when something better is an opportunity to do more stuff and play with that. I think it's it's a little harder to do when you're working for somebody, be it Marvel or done a lot of stuff for IDW. I haven't worked with DC at all, but I assume it's pretty much the same with DC, where like they have you have to turn in an outline before you write anything.
Yeah.
And they go, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do this.
Right.
At the point you start diverging too much from that outline, they go, this is not what we signed off on.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between
I've gotten...
Yeah, I write for Marvel and IDW and Titan and a bunch of other folks out there.
What's the difference between working for like Marvel versus working for like IDW?
Differences in
I feel like no matter what I say, I'm going to feel like I'm bad mouthing.
Come on, let's hear what you got to say. I'm curious.
I think like Marvel, it tends to be more of like a holistic thing. Like you have to worry about what everybody else is doing and fit it into the sort of grand structure of the Marvel universe. And not only do you have your own editor, but you have an executive editor, a group editor, and an editor-in-chief, who are all sort of mixing to make all this stuff work together. And occasionally you have to like adapt to things that are happening in other places, or you find out you can't use a character because they're going to be over here. Whereas like IDW, I've worked mostly on My Little Pony stuff, and the only real thing you have to make sure you don't do there is like contradict stuff in the show, because the show is like primary canon, and anything that comes in the comics like is only valid as long as it doesn't mess with the show.
Yeah, I would say that with Marvel too, like, both Jeremy and I have written for Dynamite as well, and most of the companies that I think we've written for, with the exception of like Marvel, have been on properties that we would call like licensed properties. They're properties that aren't owned by the company that is publishing the comics, which means that not only are you writing to an editor and like a group editor, but you're also writing with the knowledge that beyond that editor, there's like a board of people on that licensors
That you may never see.
that you will never see and don't have any interaction with, and have sometimes sort of arbitrary rules that they have to follow to sort of like, to sort of maintain the brand. And so like when you write for Marvel, you get pretty much, I would say you get pretty much instant feedback on stuff. And so, and you and your editor or your assistant editor, you're kind of working, like you said, it's very holistic. You're kind of right there in the middle of everything. Everything's kind of getting done in-house for Marvel. But when you're working for somebody like a licensor or like a publisher who mostly publishes licensed comics, there's like that extra step. And I find that sometimes that can be a little bit, I don't know, sometimes it's intimidating waiting for that note to come back, especially if you've got something that does feel a little bit, I don't want to say off-brand, but maybe feels a little bit different than what's been done with the thing before. You sometimes find out that, hey, they love you shaking things up a little bit, and you've got this idea that you're really, proud of or tied to or excited about, but it maybe doesn't quite fit what's been done with the brand before, and then you hear back. And the editor might love that idea too, and then you hear back from like the license holder that, that's a little bit too off the brand, and you have to kind of change stuff sometimes. Sometimes it'll be all about it.
I think good editors working in those spaces, Bobby was my editor at IDW, was very good at looking at my pitch and knowing what Hasbro would go for, and then figuring out how to sell what we wanted to do to Hasbro, who owns a lot of the stuff that IDW does. So like, because that's the big trick, is like, he can say yes to things all day, but Hasbro has to sign off on it in order for it to get through. So in a lot of cases it was, it's them signing off on things and sending it up to Hasbro and trying to work out whatever version of it Hasbro will actually say yes to. And I think he's also stopped me from getting in a lot of trouble probably, because occasionally I get notes back from Hasbro that I'm like, have they even seen their show? Do they know anything about their property? What are they talking about? Because clearly they're telling me I can't do this thing, and they've already done it in their show at least once. And I send that note to Bobby, and Bobby says, Jeremy's just pointing out that this appears in this episode of the show, so perhaps we could change it up to where it's like this. He's much nicer about it than I am. Yeah, he keeps me from getting fired and then from yelling at me.
Then Hasbro sends back a note that says Twilight Sparkle cannot be on fire.
Right. It's very important to this right.
So, go ahead.
In terms of process, what are the logistics of creating something for these major companies while being sort of in the Southeast, instead of like in LA or New York, major cities where they have offices?
I wish I knew the answer. I always feel like I'm a little bit on the outside looking in on that, because it's very easy to do the actual communicating back and forth. Once you're already working on something, it's very easy to go back and forth with your editor over email or occasionally phone if necessary. But I do know there are like a lot of people who've gotten work at Marvel or DC that started out as like interns at Marvel or DC, and are there in the city, and you sometimes go, they have 3 books and I have 1 book, and is that because they're there and they are just in the office bothering people, or I can just bother people over email?
Well, it certainly used to be the case. I mean, it was like obviously the bullpen where you went to get work, and then you would go across the street and try to get work at DC, and then but now, like Jeremy said, the communication's not a problem. Obviously, you should email anybody and say, hey, I have an idea. Would you be interested in me pitching on this, or hearing more? And typically that's the easy part. But kind of getting a read of the tone of the company sometimes I find to be a little bit different if you're not going to every big show, or if you're not communicating directly, like face to face. Body language is important. You can kind of like figure out kind of what's kind of going on.
I think, this is definitely the case for me with Marvel, and I think the same is true to some extent for DC. Just, I think you can come from a synergy point of view. It is like, don't always, like, there's very few books I think that come out that are pitched from a creator to Marvel or DC.
Right.
I think they decide they're looking for something to do with the Fantastic Four or the X-Men or, you know, in my case, the Future Foundation, where, you know, they think, all right, we want to do a book with these characters. Who should we approach to pitch on it? And you know, they may approach one person, they may approach 3 or 4 people, but you know, they have to think of you first.
The comics bake off.
Yeah. Yeah, I met a couple of editors at conventions and things like that, and I got a couple of emails that I could send stuff to, and I you know, would send them basically emails that were like, hi, this is who I am, I'm a writer, this is, you know, some of my books. I can send you, you know, PDFs of my work if you want. If you're interested in seeing more, just let me know. And I feel like 75% of those I never hear from the person. And then another like 15 is like, oh, thanks for emailing, but no, we're not looking for anything right now. And then you get maybe like 10% of those that are like, sure, send me some stuff. And some of those turn into some
No's.
Yeah, some of those turn into no's. Most comic book companies have like a standard email format. They have submissions guidelines, especially if you're talking about somewhere like Dark Horse or somewhere that does creator-owned stuff. Usually they'll have like something on their website that says, hey, if you want to submit stuff to us, send it, you know, to this email address or this physical address sometimes, which is crazy. But I haven't done much with that. Yeah, I think most of those companies now make you fill out some sort of thing. It's like, hey, we get submissions all the time. If you send us a submission and it just seems like we have something that's kind of like your thing, that's not on us. Like, you know, we get submissions for all kinds of ideas. Don't send us unsolicited submissions on our characters, which is something Marvel and DC are very, very firm on. Like, don't just send us your Superman pitch and then tell us in 6 months that we had somebody else write your Superman story, because we didn't ask you to do that.
I actually help out with this as well. Heather Antos on social media. She worked for DC. She worked for Marvel. She's now the editor over at Valiant Comics. Every Sunday, she does a signal boost that everyone pitches every idea whatsoever on, especially comic creators and artists, and she will retweet them, and it gets seen by other industry professionals. So the email obviously does work, but social media on Twitter, Facebook, even a little bit on Instagram in some aspects, but Twitter has seen an increase on creators actually getting stuff published, even if it's self-published or helped out through IDW or even Dark Horse. Antos, ANTOS, and it's literally her Twitter handle as well. So like, yeah, it's like hashtag Signal Boost. Signal Boost Sunday, and she just every Sunday she'll get submissions, just tag her, and she'll retweet it, and I've seen a couple of people actually get feedback from it. So, thanks social media.
I think, yeah, occasionally reaching out to editors through social media is much more productive than, you know, when you're starting, than trying to track down their emails and email them. So I'm sure they get all sorts of unsolicited emails, and usually if they're looking at their email, it's because they're at work, and most editors are overworked extremely anyway. So a lot of times they're going to see an email that's not like something they need to be doing right now and go, okay, whatever, I'll read it later. And you know, they may never look at it again. But you know, Twitter's easy enough for them to be like, oh hi, good to see you. You know, if they want you to DM them and stuff, they'll let you know, things like that. So it's much easier than like that cold email. Yeah.
I got a question.
Yep.
If you're actually teaching a class or writing comics, what would you give a new writer, you know, a book to reference or look at to see if the guy can bring it on? What books would you give them to say, okay, you need this book, you'll know how to put an idea.
I don't know that I would give anybody like one specific thing. I can tell you that things that have helped me and books that I've found helpful. I mean, a lot of them are the books that you read that everybody's going to tell you to read when it comes on, like those like if you want to be a writer or be a screenwriter, read these books, the McKee books, the Scott the Cloud, Understanding Comics, and Reinventing Comics, and
I personally really like Bendis's book. Writing for Pictures.
Pictures. That's a good book too. And then Peter David also has a really good script writing book that I like too. The book that I like the most, they're out of print now, but there's a series of books by this guy named Peter Salisbury. There's 2 volumes. It's called Comics Writers on Comics Script Writing, and it's basically just these like super in-depth interviews with like, at the time the biggest names in comics that basically break out sort of how they do it. You kind of watch sort of almost like a step-by-step process from those guys. And the book also has like really interesting examples of how everybody scripts them a little differently. So, there's like really long interviews in there with like Neil Gaiman. There's interviews in there with Grant Morrison. There's interviews in there with Chuck Dixon, Greg Rucka, Kevin Smith, Peter David. Like I'm saying, it's a very 90s, late 90s, early 2000s like cast of creators, but at the same time, it was very neat for me to see how different people do it, and you sort of Frankenstein how somebody does it. You know what I mean? You get a little piece from this guy, a little piece from this guy, but at the end of the day, I mean, writing is the best way to figure out how you're going to write, and you can look at guidebooks and sort of figure out the mechanics of it, but when it comes down to it, you got to put yourself in there too, and that's hard to tell somebody how to do.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Brian Michael Bendis' book, Writing for Pictures, is that there's several interviews where he talks to like roundtables full of artists and editors and stuff about like, what should people who are learning to write comics know? What bugs you when people write stuff in scripts? What do you want to see in scripts? Which I feel like is interesting because I think every writer gets to a point where they're like, all right, I have my style, this is what I do. And a lot of artists won't tell you when they don't like what you do.
Yeah.
Especially if they've never worked with you before, they don't know what your reaction is going to be. I've had writers or artists that I've worked with where like we do several issues and then they're like, hey man, I wish you wouldn't do this. And I'm like, okay, cool. You can tell me that. That's fine. I think especially when you're doing work for hire stuff, like they won't even necessarily introduce you to the person who's drawing your book. Sometimes it's up to you to do
Yeah, you guys kind of do the work and like build that relationship. And the more the relationship grows, you'll find stuff out about people and what they like. Like with Alta Tremontia, who drew most of the ongoing X-Men 92 series, and Jeremy worked with her on some stuff as well. She's from the Philippines, and we would communicate, and we would talk about business and stuff like that. But we didn't find out until probably we were working on the script for like number 6 or number 7 that she was a huge Dragon Ball Z fan. And then we started writing fight scenes like Dragon Ball Z fights, and she loved it. And like she really came alive as an artist. It's like, man, we should have asked her that like on number 1. But but finding out about, I think that's another thing. And the Bendis book is great. I think that's good. And Greg Rucka also has a book too, I believe. Greg Rucka? I don't know. I think he's got a script writing book too. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, that's the thing. And then of course, as a writer, you want to learn as much as you can about your medium that you're working in too. So read a couple of art books too. Like obviously, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way is a huge one. A lot of writers skip over that one because they're like, well, I'm not drawing a comic. But you can learn so much about writing just from reading that book too. How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. It's by Stan Lee and John Disney.
Well, especially if you have to be your own actor.
Your own what? Your own actor?
Yeah, for your own movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because I've been keeping a writer ever since when I was little. At age 10, when I started to write my own book with Joint Operations.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, I think talking to artists and then asking questions and things like that can be valuable, especially if you don't draw, if you're not familiar with the drawing side of things, or if you don't, there's even like very simple things like you won't think about as a writer, like the fact that panel composition, usually you need to have the person that talks first on one side and the person that talks next on further over. So if you write a scene where like they keep flip flopping at every panel, it's gonna look weird on the page if they draw it that way, and it's gonna look weird bubbling it the other way. So sometimes you have to think about little things like that. I know with Will Robson, who's drawing Future Foundation right now, it's one of those things where like early on I was like, all right, what kind of stuff do you want to draw? What do you not want to draw? And I got a list of things he wanted to draw and nothing he didn't want to draw. And then after a couple of issues, he's like, hey man, I don't want to draw a whole bunch of technology. Can you stop writing like a whole bunch of like big Kirby machines into the back of things? And I was like, oh yeah, no problem. I won't do any more technology in my book about kid scientists. But I was filling it up with all these bad guys and aliens of various shapes that he gets to go in there and draw. But also like I think the hardest part with that book is it's got a huge cast, and it's like, yeah, draw 7 people into this panel. And he's like, that takes a long time. It's very difficult.
Yeah, team books are tough. Team books are real tough. For a long I don't want to write any more team books, except for G.I. Joe, which is like the biggest team in comics. But anyway, but at the same time, I feel like you can streamline stuff. But yeah, team books are real, especially if you want that huge cast. And how many characters are in Future Foundation? The core team. You had narrow it down. I know you get the team split, sort of doing multiple things. But
Yeah, well, I mean, there's Alex, and then I added Julie Howard to the team. There's 4 Moloids. There's 2 Fish Kids. There's 2 Mutant Kids. And then there's Bentley and Anome. And
You don't have enough hands.
oh, and now I have Yondu. So we have 14 people in the main cast, and then I've added Rebecca in this last issue, so 15. Plus, I have 4 bad guys.
I don't blame
A lot of-
man.
a lot of characters and a lot of explosions.
Quit putting that technology in it. Set some scenes in the snow. Oh yeah.
I gave him a nice dead planet to draw.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
No vegetation, no anything. It's just like
There's some desert planets.
So what if you want to go and write something that that artist doesn't want to draw, but that's a critical part of that book? I mean, I know Marvel is a little hard.
yeah. I mean, if they're doing it for hire, then it's their job, and they need to get paid.
Yeah.
So they should do it.
And the other thing about that too is that, like, as a writer, you write stuff you don't want to write all the time. Like I want to tell a story about, like, it's like the outline stuff that Jeremy was talking about a minute ago. Like I outline my stuff, but I'm not like beholden to it, because there's going to be stuff that you have to do and scenes that you have to write and character development that you have to put in there for this scene to pay off that you're not necessarily thinking about when you're like pitching the book. It's like any job, you got stuff that you have to do that sometimes that you don't want to do. As a writer, I feel like it's my job to sort of like find an angle that's going to make that more interesting, right? So if you're going to set that scene in a thing where Will doesn't like drawing Kirby machines, maybe you stage that so they're not like inside the hull of the ship, but maybe they're like on the outside of a ship or something like that, like a dome. So there's a lot of like black space in the background, but you're still in the same setting. Like it's just getting creative and getting to know the people that you work with.
Especially in the environment.
Right. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. So yeah, it's just and listening to that feedback, but also having a collaborator that understands kind of what that's the job.
Yeah. I've definitely had Will tell me at least once. I'm not drawing any more team books after this.
Yeah.
This has got me off team books. But
Yeah.
there's also like he loves to throw a whole bunch of extra aliens in the back of things, and it's like, oh well, you're making a choice. This is what you want to do.
Right.
It'd be faster if you didn't have a bunch of aliens back there, but you're like, oh, I'm a good artist. I'm going to put more things in the background.
Right. And it's rare that I'm trying to think of examples now, and maybe I'm just not thinking of anybody in particular. But it's rare that you find a superstar artist who doesn't start out on a book that requires a lot of that kind of creative thinking and a lot of that kind of like outside the zone. Because I mean, you'll get your occasional people who start off on a single character and then branch out to something else. But if you think about all your major guys, they've all kind of done team books, and there's a lot of versatility in team books because the most team books aren't set in one place. They're moving around, they're doing different stuff, their roster's changing, so you're not really getting into a rut drawing one character.
Yeah, that's the dream. To get on a book that's really exciting to get on, and then you hate after 6 months, right? Like, it's like, oh man, the Avengers, I hate these guys.
Yeah, that's right. There's so many Avengers.
No, there's so many X-Men.
Yeah. Oh, hey, listen, talk about it.
But at the same time, you and Chris are my X-Men 92 writers. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, we poured. So you guys know what the X-Men are, right? Like the idea. So we're the guys who, like, we're all team. We had the 92 team, which is the animated series team, basically, and then we added Bishop to the team, and then we added Psylocke to the team, and then we added 5 Brood to the team, and then we added Deathstroke to the team, and then we had as many villains in the book, and then we ended that book by turning every human on Earth into an X-Men. And so, yeah. So, 6 billion X-Men by the end of it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
She has not worked with us on anything else. That's why she would work for Jeremy.
she also drew I made her draw, and the stuff she's done with me, she drew some of the issues of Thor versus Hulk. She drew the issue that has no less than 25 different Thors in it. Like, there's just like a splash page that's all the different versions of Thor that have popped up over time. So there's like Beta Ray Bill, and there's Storm as Thor, and there's Jade as Thor, and there's like I had like the Warren Ellis shirtless leather pants Thor in there. Yeah, and I was like, I'm just gonna throw all these in there, and then she was drawing there's a birthday party episode of Unstoppable Wasp, in which basically the whole thing is bringing in everybody that's like tangentially related to Nadia in the story. So like the whole thing is just bringing in and introducing characters like for a couple of pages, and then it ends with like a giant fight scene. So basically it's just like cramming as many characters into the background of this issue as possible. And apparently I found out as we were doing it that she was drawing this while 9 months pregnant. Literally, like, I don't know how this became the We Love All People Fancy panel, but I literally just got like a page from her at one point that was like, hey guys, just finished this, the next one's gonna be a little late, I just went into labor, so I was like, you what? You were inking this page while going into labor? Like, that's hardcore.
She left our books to go draw a book, not left our books, but she decided to draw a book with Sam Humphries, which is about a giant monster, which most people don't want to draw all the time. But she was like, yeah, one giant monster, great. 25 Thors, 6 billion X-Men, it's a nice change.
Did you see the fat Thor in LA the other day? He dressed up in a fat suit in LA.
Oh man, that is a cosplay that I did not expect to see as much as I've seen recently. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, the Brooklyn that we had last night for the cosplay contest got the biggest pop, and he got honorable mention, but he had the biggest pop from everyone in the audience.
Listen, that cosplay gives me hope.
It does, right?
I went to that movie and I was like, finally. I can do
the chubby Thor, the sweatpants Peter B. Parker.
Yes,
They've both been very popular.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah.
It's like all the guys that are shaped like us are like, finally a cosplay for me.
Let's do it.
That's it.
Do you guys have any other questions? Anybody got a question they want to ask about something? Yeah, we've still got, let's see what time. We got
Yeah, it's still 1:30.
The chat doesn't actually appear on camera, but you can try.
That's right. You got a question. I see you itching for it.
Sorry.
Can you speak up just a little bit? I'm so sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you get into writing?
Yeah, how to make money in comics? Oh, no. we don't know that.
I'm not like that.
There's I forget who said it, but somebody more clever than I am basically said that like comics is like break out of prison. Like once you do it once, you probably can't do it again. Like getting into comics is.
No.
Did you say that?
That's not it. It was fraction.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you want to write so well, people want to come to you and ask you to write.
What was the quote? So I stole this from Matt Fraction. Breaking into comics is like breaking out of prison. Each person can only do it one way, and then they block that out so nobody else can do it.
That's right, they break it up and do that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so like a lot of people come in through a lot of different ways. Like we mentioned, there are a lot of people we know that were like at one point interns at Marvel or DC or something like that. There's a lot of older stories if you talk to older guys about like, yeah, I was working doing like stuff for the magazine in the next office at some point. They were all owned by the same company. They were like, hey, we need somebody to write this issue of Fantastic Four.
Sure, yeah.
And but this a lot of that.
They're already in the building too, yeah.
Yeah, but guys from the 60s and 70s have a lot of those kind of stories. I think a lot of people now coming to comics kind of sideways. Either you're writing some other kind of thing, or you're a celebrity of some sort, or maybe the son of a celebrity of some sort. Sorry. But like, that's right. I'm prepping them. I'm gonna have a whole workshop of children writing my stories for me.
Yeah, Chad said earlier, so Chad actually started out as a webcomic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where he...
It was not a popular webcomic. No, the thing is like a lot of things, the thing that I think that most people have in common, this is kind of, I think what Jeremy was getting at, is that they certainly are involved with comics prior to getting the gig, if that makes sense. I run into a lot of people who come up to me at cons, probably Jeremy sees the same thing, where they come up and like, hey, I want to break into comics, I want to get into comics, I want to write comics. And the first question I ask them is like, okay, what are you writing now? What are you working on now? And they're like, oh, well, I don't really write anything right now. And you're like, well, what comics do you read? And they're like, well, I don't really read comics. I'm really into this. And you're like, I'm not saying you have to be a comics fan to write comics, or that some guy off the street's not going to walk up one day and write like the next, Watchmen or whatever. But it certainly helps to be immersed in the thing that you want to do. It's like if you want to play professional baseball, but you've never picked up a baseball bat, you just like watching baseball sometimes. It's like, you got to kind of get out there and put yourself out there. So I would say the first thing that you do is make comics and read comics and live in comics for a little while. And not just comics, but like all kinds of stories and all kinds of writing and all kinds of creative outlets too. I feel like that's the first step. And then, coming to conventions like this, coming to panels like this, going out and talking to editors at panels. And honestly, not that Jeremy and I are anxious or anything like that, but like, social media is huge. You know what I mean? Social media is huge, and like, I don't know if like, I think Leah Williams was like certainly on her way to writing prior to her social media stuff, but I think that, and I look at her and I look at, what are some other social media accounts that I think that have really blown up and certainly got like,
Kate Lath especially.
Kate Lath, yeah.
She used to, she does still just do her own webcomics. She just posts stuff online at the Patreon.
Right.
Occasionally, she has a creator-owned book that gets picked up somewhere, or she gets hired to write, Vampirella or Buffy or, whatever else.
Even my co-writer Chris. I mean, he came up through not by writing for any major publisher. He came up writing his own daily blog every day, reviewed a comic, wrote a funny article, did something else, pointed out a comic that people hadn't seen. And that's his break-in. He broke in through not writing comics, but writing other stuff, So yeah, there's not really, like putting yourself out there, and putting yourself out there in such a way that's going to get some attention from not just editors, but a lot of different people's, the kind of, I don't know, it's a very, very good way to do it this day and age, but I mean, you have to have something behind that too, right?
Yeah, and I think the trick is like nobody's gonna knock on your door and ask you to write Spider-Man. Like, they've got.
They might knock on your door and ask you to write
X-Men. If you are making comics or you're doing something, like you can't wait for the perfect opportunity to break in, or you'll never get that because you have to like. Especially in order to work at, say, a Marvel Comics. I think the biggest thing that a lot of people don't realize with that is they're thinking like, oh, I have writing skill, I can do this, I can make a comic. And I think the hardest thing for people to adapt to in comics, both from a writing and an art standpoint, is those things come out every month. You got 20 pages that got to get done every month, and they need somebody who delivers that with consistency. And like you have to be able to show them, yes, I have an established record of creating content. You know, I do this every day, I do this every week, every month, whatever. Because like, if they hired you to write Spider-Man, and you write that first 20-page story, and then you don't write the next one, they're gonna hire somebody else to write Spider-Man. You know, it's over.
Spider-Man's gotta come out this month.
Yeah, it's gotta come out this month, whether you write it or somebody else writes it.
Yeah, we've all read a terrible comic, right? We've all read a really bad comic and we're like, this comic sucks. And like, how did this guy get the job? Well, because you know, Darkhawk hadn't come out that month. Not a dig on Danny Fingeroth. I wrote Darkhawk. I'm talking about myself. But that's the deal. Like it's a business, and if you want to write for Marvel, if you want to write for DC, if you want to write for anybody, you know, you have to have that professional, like, not just be good at it, but also be good at all the other stuff that comes with it.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of people who get one very successful comic, and then they never have a second very successful comic, because you know they got the story out that they wanted to tell, that they've been dying to tell for however long, and they don't really have another thing. And I think, you know, establishing a track record, establishing that you have you know, a history of writing stuff. So, I mean, there are a lot of people that want to talk about, oh, you know, this person. I think when Ta-Nehisi Coates got the job writing Black Panther, there were a lot of people that were like, this guy's never written a comic book. And it's like, that's true, and you can kind of see it in some of his early issues, is they're not formatted to be like a whole story, they're just a chunk of a story. But that guy writes for The Atlantic, and he puts out he puts out essays all the time.
Yeah.
He's got several books on his hands. That is a guy who writes with consistency, that like they are certain is going to keep doing stuff that they don't have to chase down later on and be like, hey, where is this issue of Black Panther that's coming out next?
Right. And has a built-in audience, and has a voice, a very particular voice that would apply well to that project too. So it's like the perfect storm. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, over there, they have an exhibit, South Carolina is opening a new exhibit. Thousands of comic books have been donated to the University of South Carolina. They're opening on the 29th with special guest Michael Nolan, and it's going to be open to December 20th, and there's thousands of comics. You can look at it, you can read and get ideas, and they're wonderful.
Yeah. And there's a lot of dollar boxes on the floor that you can go and just like find something you like, you know, and reverse engineer a comic. That's how I started. I don't know, like I would reverse engineer a comic. You would find a comic and you would basically say like, okay, so this is a comic that
They're like, how is it good?
yeah, how is this comic good or how is this comic bad? Like we're talking about comics, we've all read a comic that doesn't work, right? Find a comic that doesn't work and look back through it and say like, okay, what could these creators have done differently, or why did they make the decisions they made, and what would I do differently? Because it's, not liking something's fine, but figuring out how to make it better or figuring out how to do it differently in your own voice is kind of what makes this work, I guess, when it works.
I think if you read enough comics, and you probably should if you want to write them, there's some point where you will read a comic, and in the middle of reading it, you'll go, what? How did they do that?
Yeah.
Oh my God, they got me! Like, you get excited. I still remember there was a point in like,
X-Men 92 number 5.
well, obviously, but it's hard to pick out just one. I still remember there's a point in Infinity that like Thor like throws his hammer around the sun and it comes back around and like crashes through that dude.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah.
what?
No, and that's it. That's exactly right. And it happens we've all had that moment in the Marvel movies too. Like, like when it sneaks up on you, oh, it's so good.
Yeah. The hammer goes flying past Thor and Cat grabs it.
Yeah.
It's like, ah, what?
And you like kind of knew it was coming, like in your mind,
And
totally you was like, you're on, gotta do it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's the good stuff.
Yes, sir.
When you did your first Marvel book and you saw it on print, what was your reaction?
I wonder how many that sold.
I think my reaction was like, Can't believe it.
Yeah, I have that thing, yeah, like, I fooled them.
Yeah, I think we both did stuff during Secret Wars.
Yeah.
Right? We both had our first story during Secret Wars, and yeah, like that was literally like I wrote this story for this, and months of planning went into these sort of 8 pages, and at some point, I think we were in Sumter at the show down there, and I got a call from my editor, and she's like, "Hey, it looks like Guri Hiru is available to draw this story. Would you think Guri Hiru would be a good match for this story?" And I was like, "Yes! Get them now! Why are you asking me? Go get them! Drawing this story, that's amazing." Like, I wouldn't even know how to contact Guri Hiru. They're not even in the same country as me. We don't speak the same primary language.
Yeah.
Like, yes, go get them. And like getting, that's one of the best parts of writing comics is getting pages back in. And just
It's the absolute best.
yeah, because especially with Guri Hiru, they're an artist studio, so basically you just get finished pages back. Between the two of them, they do the pencils and the inks and the colors. So you just get finished pages, and you're like, oh god, they actually did it. Like this thing that I wrote on paper, they did it.
Yeah. That is the best.
It breaks your mind.
Yeah,
Iron Fist just punched the dinosaur in my comic. That is amazing.
That is the best part about, like, I think you'll talk to any comics writer, especially the ones who don't have a background in art, and I think that moment where you open up your inbox, and you've either got like some really great thumbnails, or you've really got, that's actually my favorite part, is the thumbnail part, or the breakdown. So before it goes to like finished art, and it's ready to get colored, or it's ready to get lettered, you'll typically get like, thumbnails or breakdowns of what the page looks like, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Like this person took what I wrote on this, this paper and turned it into this amazing scene.
I want to say my favorite character designs, like when, especially if they're original characters, but even if you just like change outfits or costumes or something like that,
changing it up.
You get those like original designs, and you're like, oh man.
I'll tell you what the best feeling is here. Like when, and this is egotistical, so I apologize, but it's when you do, like, I don't know if you've sketched out anything, or if when you've drawn anything, and then you see an artist that is amazing, like, they might just take like a little tidbit of something you've done, and put it in there, and you're like, wow, like, there's a little bit of me underneath there. There's a cover to X-Men 92 number 4, and it's Charles Xavier with his back to the audience, and he's in his chair, and he's very small in the image, and this thing called the 10 Sentinel, which is like 10 Sentinels that they've merged together into this one giant Sentinel. So it's like this, this Sentinel with 20 arms, and like all these legs and all these heads, and it's like just hovering over him. And like I designed that on the back of a note card at my day job, and scanned it in at my day job, and emailed it to him. I was like, hey, I think this would be kind of a cool cover. And like 48 hours, it's back as a sketch from Pepe Larraz. And you're like, oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. And anyway, that's just a good, the collaborative aspect of comics is really the best part about it, right? That's my favorite part about working for like Marvel or anybody, is that collaboration is.
Yeah, there's no bad artists at Marvel. Like, you're gonna get something extremely good.
Yeah.
That like you probably don't have enough money to pay somebody to do, but Marvel does.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Absolutely.
That is dope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, sadly, that is our time.
But you know what I'm saying, even though you don't read comics, or you know what I'm saying, you play the video games on the computer, and not just playing computer games, also watching the movie, you know what I'm saying, not to just watch, but watching and learn, and put it and get some ideas and put it into the story.
Yeah. Inspiration from everywhere.
Yep. Even on a life. I mean, like real life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially real life. Yeah.
All right, Chad, because I love you, you can do one more.
You have one more here?
Yeah, just, so editor from any of the big companies comes up to you and says, you've got a title, it's whatever bit you want. Who do you get?
Have to go first? Do you not know?
I just want to see you take mine.
Snake eyes?
I just want to see you take mine.
That's a tough question.
And it's different for every publisher, right? Like obviously if Marvel comes up, I'm gonna say like, if Marvel comes up, I probably would say like Thor, or like a more obscure character like Death's Head or something like that, probably, because you know, even though I love Spider-Man, Spider-Man's one of those characters I'm like, how do I have a good Spider-Man story in here right now? But I can probably make those other characters kind of interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I'm no desire in me to read a Batman story.
Right.
There's a lot of those out there already. But I like characters that I feel like are underserved, that I feel like have good stories. I've always, like, with DC, I always want to do like Vixen, Black Canary, and like Orphan, these characters that have been sort of surrounding these bigger characters that don't often get a chance. Like, I'd love to write a Zatanna story. But yeah, I have no interest in writing Batman or Superman at this point.
Yeah. DC character, my dream character would be probably the Creeper. I think he's great. And then yeah, G.I. Joe. It's G.I. Joe tattoo. It's the Rishikaye ninja tattoo from G.I. Joe.
Means he's a ninja.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The chubby Thor ninja.
Well, of course, if you guys have any more questions, be sure to find them at their tables in the exhibit hall. What's your tables located?
Right across from each other. I think am I A40?
Oh my God, you guys actually are.
Yeah. If I'm A40, Jeremy's right across the aisle.
Yep. We're in the artist alley, right?
Back here over this way.
There. That way. Yeah.
So
We're right
you're
in
gonna
front of
exit,
there.
and then you're gonna go. Thank y'all so much for hanging out.
Thank you guys.
Cut the chit chat and log on. We are the nerds. We are the nerds of the apocalypse. Yep, we are the nerds. We are the nerds. We are the nerds of the apocalypse. We are the nerds. We are the nerds of the apocalypse. We are the nerds. We are the nerds of the apocalypse. If it don't confuse the squad.